Emotional intelligence is the gravy, it's the oil you cook in, it's the water you boil in, it's everything in that meal that will help the team to arrive at collective intelligence, collective output, collective productivity. Because as soon as we're not all pulling in the same direction, we're not going to get to the destination we want to be in.
Welcome back to the Humble Mind podcast. I am very happy today to be joined by Theran Knighton-Fitt, who, aside from being the co-founder of Migro, is also, I think, one of the clearest voices I know today when it comes to navigating the intersection of emotional intelligence, leadership, and the future of work, where it's all going. Theran has spent many years helping individuals and organizations cultivate a deeper sense of self-awareness, stronger teams, and more authentic human connection. And he brings a rare mix of wisdom, warmth, and some real-world experience to these sorts of conversations, which I think should be, we should be spending more time on. So really looking forward to our conversation today. Thanks for your time, Theran.
Lovely to be here, Alex. My conversation with you a couple of, weeks, months back was such a stimulating one that I jumped at the opportunity to have another one. You were on our webinar a while back, and I get to be on your podcast. So it's great. It's been great to collaborate together, and I'm excited for where the conversation takes us.
Absolutely. And just to make you feel even more crazy about how quickly time passes, that conversation actually happened in 1978. So yeah.
It feels like it.
It's insane times how quickly things run away when we're busy and when we're always doing what we need to be doing. But I originally framed this conversation around emotional intelligence and kind of relating that to the future of work, the future of who we are while we are working as workers, as people who add value in an economic sense. Which I think is definitely happening. And we're seeing a lot of signs of this kind of message slowly start to kind of be swallowed and ingested by the right people in businesses, whether they're small businesses or, large publicly listed organizations. So I think something is working in the messaging. Something is happening in a really positive sense. And before maybe we go into how that is really playing out in real terms and where companies are investing and what's going on there, maybe it's good for us to start just always at the beginning with a helpful definition. How do you see what emotional intelligence is? Because, we get, cognitive intelligence, we get, what an IQ test tells us about, how clever we are or how clever someone is, right? There's a sort of a sense of intelligence in some way. But when we think about emotional intelligence, that has to also be defined, I think, quite carefully. How do you normally approach that in a useful way?
Well, listen, I've got a short definition, which I'll start with, and then I'll give you a long definition, and you can interrupt me at any point and say, let's move on.
That's it. That's what I'll do.
That might be the way to go about it. Before I give the short definition, maybe just to say there are many different academic models out there as to what the construct of emotional intelligence actually is, what skills it covers, and what the implication of it in daily living for yourself and for relationships. And as a result of that, the different academic constructs may have slight differences in terms of how they cluster the skills and what they name them. And as a result of that, there are likely to be many different definitions. However, all of them sort of agree on this as a bit of a catch-all definition. It's how we define it at Migro. And I don't think you'd find a definition of EQ that differs from it, even if the words are different. We basically say that emotional intelligence is a set of skills that makes you great at managing yourself and your interactions with others. So the implication there is when you have low EQ, low emotional intelligence, you are not as good at managing your own self in the context of the world and others and your interactions with them. To go back to this idea of many different models out there, we often use the analogy of a motor car. That a motor car is a motor car. It essentially does the same thing. It transports either people or things from A to B, and it uses some kind of fuel to do that. But it may be a sedan or a hatchback or an SUV. It may be diesel or petrol. It may have the steering wheel on the right or the left. There are differences, and in some ways they're just semantic differences because a vehicle is still a vehicle. So some models of EQ will cluster something like empathy in one set of skills, or in a different model in another sort of categorization of skills. Essentially, EQ, no matter how you look at it, is a vehicle. It's a car. You may call it a car or an automobile or a whatever, but essentially it's the same set of things, which comes down to that definition: the ability to manage yourself and your interactions with others more effectively. I ended up starting with a long definition and ending with a short one. Apologies.
No, that's great. No, that's great. That's useful. So really it's about regulating how you respond and react, and how our emotions, which we're all wired with, which we all came, fresh in the box with, sometimes it almost is, it's almost as though emotions need to be dealt with in the same way you might deal with children, where, sometimes they behave, sometimes they just don't, and they get it wrong and they can't read the cues, and then boom, we explode, or we start crying, or we start laughing when, we're in the middle of a funeral or something inappropriate. So is that a fair way to sort of see it?
Yeah, if I take that and sort of rephrase it in another way, we often speak about emotions, about emotional intelligence, is that emotions are information giving you important data, and how you respond to that data is where emotional intelligence plays in. So it is being intelligent about the emotions you experience. So emotional intelligence doesn't mean you have lots of emotions. It doesn't mean you are just aware of your emotions. It means you are clever in how you deal with them. But it's not just your own emotions. It's intelligence about the other people's emotions as well, because you're receiving this data not just internally, but externally as well. And in fact, your emotions coming at me are going to create an emotional response in me. So emotional intelligence is, how do I navigate my own response to this moment with what I'm feeling, what you're feeling? How do we move forward adaptively, is a good psychological word, instead of maladaptively? How do we move forward in this in a way that is going to have the best results for me, for you, for all of us? And being able to be intelligent about that data is what makes the difference as to whether you lash out and hit them back, or say you started it, or to say, well, why are we talking about this? Last week you did that, or whatever the dynamic is. Of course, those are extreme examples in the form of an argument, but essentially it comes down to how you respond to the information, the data that these signposts of emotion are trying to tell you. And the emotion is important. Every single emotion is important. It is always trying to tell you something. What you do with that information is where your EQ comes in.
I think that's super useful as a way to understand not just the definition, but also to understand the role that our emotions play, whether we design it that way or not. Emotions are information, just like numbers, just like data. But at the same time, the sort of the skill set of managing that information, putting that to best use, is where the intelligence comes in.
So and in many ways, it is cognitive intelligence. It's just cognitive intelligence applied to your emotional experience. When your emotions are deliberately trying to shut down your frontal lobes. I mean, that's what the fight, flight, and freeze response do. They say, frontal lobes, go away. You got no space here. We're going to trust the reptilian brain to tell us what to do. Reptilian brain, the ancient one that is only concerned with survival, not thriving, says run, or hit them in the teeth, or hide behind the curtain, whatever the application is of the fight, flight, or freeze response. What happens when you are triggered, your amygdala, a little part of the emotional centers of the brain, is constantly looking for danger. That's its job. It's the siren, it's the alarm bell. Its job is to look at the data and say, oh, last time he looked at you like that, it meant it ended in pain. And the amygdala is remembering that emotional memory, tells the frontal lobes to shut up, go away. It tells the reptilian brain to kick into high gear, get the body ready to fight, get the body ready to run. So that data that comes to you, you have to be intelligent about, because maybe I'm interpreting this data based on my prior experiences with someone else and not with this person. Um, so you can't always trust the information. You have to be intelligent about navigating it. One of the things we often hear in the world of emotions is don't let your emotions control you. And I think that's 100% wrong. Emotions are there to control you. That's their job. You just need to be able to have intelligence about whether you can trust the emotion and what the emotion is prompting from you, or whether you can create enough distance between stimulus and response to say, no, 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 hold your breath, count to five,
Mm.
or whatever, or just say,
Mm.
can we take a break? I'd like to talk about this tomorrow, or I'd actually love to continue this conversation with someone else in the room. Or, obviously I'm using extremes, but this plays all the way down to every moment of our experience. Is she laughing at me? Is she rolling her eyes at me? If my narrative, if the emotional data I have stored is that nobody thinks my ideas are good, well, then yes, she's rolling her eyes at me.
Mm.
Not, oh, she's got some dust in her eye, or whatever another explanation could be. I use the emotional memory of the past as the filter through which to engage in the moment. And if I have a narrative that has led me to think a certain way about myself or about the other,
Yeah.
then maybe the data I'm using is actually it needs some hygiene. It needs to be interrogated. I need to ask myself some questions about, you know,
Mm.
is she trying to steal my ideas like she always does, or am I just on a high alert for that because that happened in my last job?
Yeah. A friend of mine a few years ago, she used to work specifically around imposter syndrome. And one of the things she used to use as a really effective phrase was that thoughts aren't facts. Um, and
Mm,
it's this general idea that whatever your brain is convincing itself of in that particular moment, spotting all the connections, oh, she is stealing my idea. Oh my gosh, I am an imposter. What am I doing here? And making that sort of story to itself. And in this sense, not really kind of using the emotional information in the best way. The brain presents its all of that as the truth.
yeah.
That is what's happening, and that becomes the filter, if you like, of reality. And a lot of her work was around like what we think is not necessarily always going to be either what's true or what is directly happening, and deserves, I suppose, what you're talking about here is a sort of a process of elimination, a process of sort of like, okay, well, wait, hang on, let me pay attention to all the signs. How can I determine, is this actually happening? Am I just reacting to it? Can there be something perhaps, a little more to understand before I make a decision, before I carry a reaction, right?
Yes, yeah. I mean, what you're raising is so central to this concept of the actual physiological reality of your brain, the actual brain cells, or what we would call neurons, and the way they wire together into neural pathways, into an actual architecture of cells in your brain. That is the result of your thoughts. So while thoughts aren't facts, thoughts do become biology. And
Mm.
biology then drives the way you see the next interaction. We often use, the example of a like a pathway through the forest or whatever. If you're going on that walk, you're more likely to walk on the path. Why? Because everyone else, or you yourself, and all the prior walks you've done, you've walked the same path. You will walk it by default. And that's the same thing that happens with neural pathways. You build up a set of neurons that have a relationship with other neurons that form pathways in your brain that say, I'm not good enough, or I don't
Yeah.
deserve this, or let's take imposter syndrome, like I'm a fake. Soon they're going to figure it out, or whatever those thoughts are. They're not necessarily the truth, but they have a way of creating a real structure inside your brain that represents your mind on the issue. Your mind is what the brain does. So this interplay between reality in terms of your neural pathways and the reality that may or may not be the case, what ends up sometimes happening is you actually do create that reality. You don't have to take those thoughts as fact, but unless you can process them, like you mentioned, unless you can work the system internally, and in psychology, there are a whole series of techniques you can do. We use a lot of them on our platform that develops EQ to actually sort of retro build new pathways. So your existing pathway may be Lucy's useless. She never finishes what she starts. I really wish she wasn't on my team. Maybe that's the way I've begun to think about her. If I practice certain techniques like the giving praise technique, it is a way of structuring your thoughts to look for reasons to praise Lucy. And now all of a sudden I realize, wait, I've been a bit unfair on Lucy. She's actually flipping brilliant at this. And as soon as I start praising that, I build the thoughts that create a new reality inside my brain, helps me interact with her in a different way. And then actually that becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Now she doesn't have this label that she's beginning to develop for herself, that I'm useless, I never finish anything I start. They always roll their eyes at me when I say that I had hit some challenges, or, I'm just making up examples off the cuff here. But when you do that, you actually can use thoughts to create more positive reality.
I think what you're saying is really quite profound in a way, especially when you explain what actually does happen rather than what we would wish to be happening. Because actually it's happening right there already, and there's a sort of a filter on reality that we can choose to apply or to interrogate and then apply.
Yeah.
In the same way, I suppose you can liken that to affirmations. Being able to sort of work with a certain word or a kind of a sound even to sort of repeat, and to kind of just, repeat and repeat and repeat until it sort of just gets into your head and into your body ultimately.
Yes.
So that it feels like it's something that can be true. And the body then, your body and your mind, then work with that as though it were true, which is why they're so powerful in that way. But I hadn't thought about almost switching it around and being able to have affirmations outwards, with someone else. Like, you are good at your job and you don't forget stuff, and don't worry, I'm here for you. And then that being a kind of a double reinforcement.
And the interplay of emotion in those things is so powerful, because it works with it. There is an emotional contagion that happens because we are wired to use the emotional information of others for survival as well. We sort of have this interpersonal, what we call here at Migro, like an interpersonal Wi-Fi, that I am on high alert for emotion that comes from you. In fact, my amygdala will process emotional data from you faster than rational data from you. So if your body language or your tone is at odds with the stuff you're saying, I'm actually putting more value on the emotional data than the rational linguistic data. So I am wired to receive your emotion and make sense of it. And the way I do that, the way the amygdala does that, and the mirror neurons in my own brain, is that I don't try and rationally understand your emotion. I replicate your emotion. So my brain replicates your emotion. You laughing, I actually saw a clip on Instagram yesterday of some guy on the train literally just looking at his phone laughing as if no one else was on the train. He had his headphones and he was just laughing. And then someone else is filming everyone else around him. It's just a little bit like a yawn,
Yes.
Someone yawns and you want to yawn. It's the same effect. And the reason that happens is because the way the brain wants to communicate emotion to me is to show me, not tell me. So if you are experiencing a moment of terror, I mean, here's another, trope on Instagram, is the wife who walks out the front door and then freaks out, and then the husband walking behind her is also freaking out. He doesn't know what's going on. Yeah. And then they show clip after clip of the same kind of thing. It's the same dynamic. I replicate your emotion inside me. That's how my body tells me what the information is. So there's so much research about this out there in the world of psychology and neuroscience, neuropsychology. Examples of how if you put like brain imaging scans on people and you prick them on the arm with a pin, and then you can track which part of the brain is firing. The same thing will happen if I have this imaging material, whatever, scans on my head, and I'm looking at you while they prick you in the arm. The same part of my brain will fire, because I'm actually replicating that, and that's an empathic response.
Yes.
And it happens with all emotion because I'm trying to read the world of emotion to help me know how to navigate it. Sorry, I'm like properly on a little,
Yes.
on a high horse here of, my hobby horse of interesting things. But before I jump off it, one more thing just to share about this is something that is very widely researched called affective blindsight. And what affective blindsight is a phenomena where people who have damage to their optical nerve, so their eyes mechanically work, but the visual cortex is at the back of the brain here, the eyes are at the front. There's an optical nerve that runs, it's the whatever, front to back of the head. What's that, 15 centimeter nerve that takes the information to my visual cortex to process it rationally. It's a rational part of the brain. There's a little shortcut that happens from the eyes directly to the amygdala, which is, as I said, the alarm bell looking for danger. And to people who have damage to their optical nerve, they are essentially blind. They can't see anything because their visual cortex can't process anything, but they can still discern and respond to emotion shown on a human face because this little shortcut going from the eyes directly to the amygdala is not broken.
Oh,
So
wow.
if you hold up a picture of an apple, their brain is not going to be able to register this as an apple. But you hold up a picture of an angry face, the parts of their brain that fire when there's anger, those parts of the brain will fire because we're still representing that visual information with the amygdala, not the visual cortex. It's almost two separate systems, one for emotion, one for, I guess, rational experience.
Are they actually able to then see the face, or is it rather
No.
the information and the feeling that comes through that information from the amygdala, then they kind of feel frightened or threatened?
Yeah. So my understanding of it, obviously, all I've done is read some of the studies. I haven't been in the lab doing this research. My understanding of it would be that if somebody with complete use of their eyes, you show them a picture of an apple and say, "What is this?" They'd say, "That's an apple," and the part of their brain that would fire, that's recognizing the apple, would fire. You show a blind person an apple, that part of the brain doesn't fire.
Right.
But you show them an angry face. Whether or not they can say, "I can't see it, but it's an angry face." I'm not saying it's a conscious knowledge. I'm saying
Yes.
it's subconscious. That part of the brain that would trigger information around safety or lack of safety is firing. For those, I would guess, who are just very much in touch with the emotional realities, like emotional self-awareness is high for them. Well, I could imagine that they would be able to say, "I'm sensing something." But I mean, that gets into the realm of a little bit weird and freaky.
Well, we're we're safely there. So yeah, that is fascinating. And I suppose it also, you mentioned the word safety, and that's an interesting one because I suppose almost as much as we might hear about the conditions under which emotional intelligence kind of also appears, we often also hear about psychological safety, and I suppose that's got everything to do with the ability to be vulnerable, the ability to drop walls, the knowledge that someone is really listening and actively paying attention to something I might be sharing, especially if it is sensitive information, and that then provides the kind of the atmosphere in the room of me being able to feel like I am safe in some way. It's interesting how, the different levels of the usage of the word safe, I suppose there's almost like a Maslow type of way of understanding it, right? There's, the predator who's going to come and eat me because he's hungry, safety. And then there's the safety in terms of our relationship and the emotional connection there. Can you speak a bit more about safety? Yeah.
Yeah. And in many ways, they seem very different. But I think you're right to say they're the same thing because essentially, neurologically, they're the same thing. What negative emotion, by and large, tries to do is take over so that we don't have to think. It's very important to not get too philosophical when the lion is chasing you across the savannah. That's not the time. It's not the time to say, I'm really enjoying the sunset. Do you mind if we just put a pin in this whole stay alive project? In 10 minutes, I'll run. Just sit there. Like you don't do that. So what needs to happen in that moment is your legs need to be prepared to run. You need adrenaline. You need blood pumping. The brain's not like the rational, conscious part of the brain. That's not its function. It is the subconscious part of the brain that is in charge of that stuff. It's almost like we can't trust you. Great. It's nice that humans are these very rationally powerful creatures. Now's not the time to be that. Now's the time to stay alive. You're not safe. So what the amygdala does is to basically say it takes that emotional information, that sense of terror that's rising up because you've heard the growl, and before you even know what the growl is rationally, your amygdala is saying, I know what that growl means, or I know that roar.
Yeah.
We process that before we process it. You see, what's happening with affective blind sight in the amygdala, it's not just the eyes. It's doing that with audio information as well. So you hear a lion roaring before you are cognitively aware that you're in danger. You are subconsciously aware that you're in danger. And I don't want you to think about it. I want you to run.
Yeah.
Or depending on what it is, maybe you're going to just lash out and shoot. And then you realize you've shot your friend and not your enemy, or, whatever. These things happen at a pre-conscious level. So the first rule of evolution is stay alive. And when we experience emotions like fear or anger, fear's, I guess, the easiest one to properly understand. When we experience that kind of moment, what it does for us is to say, don't think about it, act fast before you even know what you're doing. So that same mechanism of shutting down the frontal lobes, that's what happens in the boardroom. That's what happens in your team. When you're not feeling safe, you actually lose the ability to think clearly. So the reason psychological safety has become such an important concept in the world of teams, in the world of human operations, at work, is because the productive capacity of your hired team members is diminished. I mean, sure, there's a lot of us who would care about psychological safety just for the sake of the humans involved, but it's a very important thing, even for people who just care about the bottom line or care about engagement scores, because as soon as there is a sense of lack of safety, well, now survival is more important. Don't bring your idea. Just listen. Just sit quietly. Don't contribute the best of what you have. In fact, you probably can't contribute the best of what you have because your brain is in a negative downward spiral, thinking only about protection, not thinking about innovation or collaboration, etc. And that definition, I think the universal definition for psychological safety is the shared belief. So it's not an individual thing, it is a collective thing. The shared belief that the team is safe for interpersonal risk-taking. So if I don't feel like I can risk my idea, or I can risk saying, I think you overstepped there, or if I can risk saying, listen, that was really my idea, and it feels like you presented it, that it was your idea. That's a risk for me to do that. If I don't feel I can do that, I actually shut down. So they're very much the same thing neurologically. We are still the recipients of that evolutionary mechanism to stay alive. And in the same way that herds, there's the classic image in your brain, I'm sure, of, the first zebra or wildebeest starts running and the entire herd starts running literally a split second apart. That's not a rational decision. We're drawing on the emotions of others. So if I'm in a meeting and you're not feeling safe, well, now my mirror neurons are recreating that in me. Yeah. It really is a cocktail of things that need to go right to be able to build safety. It's not a default.
Like the guy laughing on the train, right? It's going to have that sort of ricochet. Yeah.
And the same thing, of course, happens retroactively. If it is unsafe and I model vulnerability and it's not used against me, then that also takes us on an upward spiral. Yes. If I'm willing to take a risk, I prove it's okay and I'm not going to be crucified for this risk, then I can actually shape it. I can shape it up or I can shape it down.
It's awesome hearing you just talk about it and kind of explain it in this way, because I think when it's framed in these sorts of terms, not just as the individual, but just like you said, the shared risk taking and the shared direction of, are we going to go on an upward spiral, and we're going to continue to sort of thrive and work off each other's sense of creativity and thinking boldly and moving things upwards, or the exact opposite, where we all just shut down and no one gets any benefit of any shared impulse to do anything new.
Yeah.
It really puts it into I think the part of the conversation where it belongs, which is, this is a priority not just for businesses, but within families, within friendship groups, within any kind of social interaction. It just does not work without being able to understand what are these drivers that allows my colleagues, my friends, my family, people around me, a sense of that safety, that shared safety, because their safety is my safety. And so it really is this very kind of egalitarian kind of way of doing things, because that's, like you said, evolution. That's how we evolved. That's what we do everything together. When you go out and you're alone in the savannah, the chances of you dying are that much higher. And so, there's got to be the safety and the thriving of the whole, sometimes even at the expense of the individual. So my kind of question, I suppose, in that is that if our understanding of all of these huge kind of concepts of emotional intelligence, vulnerability, psychological safety, what the nervous system is doing, and which have all benefited from research, science, practicality, all of these things that we now understand, and that have benefited from this increased understanding. But then we're also working within systems of collaboration which maybe comparatively have not evolved and are still perhaps in 1930s style conveyor belt human organizational technology, if I can call it that way.
Yeah.
That then makes this conversation harder and harder to have, in terms of being able to find the time to be able to say a human being requires the space in which to thrive emotionally, so that all of the great innovation and all of the things that drives the bottom line allows, has that space to happen. Why is that still such a hard conversation to have with the people who ultimately are going to be pressing the button to say, yes, okay, let's invest in our emotional intelligence, in the emotional intelligence of our people?
I think, there's a number of realities at play, which means a number of potential answers to a question like that. What we find is with some people, they're very ready to have the conversation. They really value it. They understand it. With many people, they don't. And sometimes it's a function of just misunderstanding. I think in a lot of my experience in trying to sell EQ as something that's worth developing, our tool, our product builds individual competencies at scale in a collective environment. So multiple people building skills at the same time. And some people get that, some people don't. And I think part of the reason is a lot of people think they understand what EQ is. They think it means I am empathetic, or it means I'm in touch with my own emotions. Like sometimes someone will say to me, "Oh, she's got a lot of EQ. She's often crying," and I'm like, "Well, I don't know. Does that mean she has high EQ? It by itself definitely doesn't mean it. She might have very high EQ. She might have very low EQ. They're both presenting as her crying all the time."
Yeah.
But in my experience of learning more and more and more over the last 10 years, all of us have more. Let me do a thumbs up number. 80% of us have less EQ than we think. And the reason is because we are thinking of one specific aspect. Like I can hold my tongue. I don't have to react. I've got high EQ. Of course, as I said, that a lot of people will say I've got terrible EQ. So I do hear that quite often, but it's because they're thinking of one aspect of it. I mentioned this idea earlier of EQ being a complex set of skills. In my experience, some people are very high in certain aspects of EQ and very low in other aspects of EQ. For instance, you could be you could have, you could be very emotionally self-aware, understanding what's going on for yourself. But the flip side of that is maybe you have low assertiveness. Assertiveness is an EQ skill. So I'm very aware of what I'm feeling, but I don't value myself. My self-regard is too low to be assertive. Self-regard is another EQ competency that we talk about in our process. So if my self-regard is low, my assertiveness could be low, but my empathy may be super high because you're really important and what you're feeling is important. What I'm feeling isn't, I'm not important. So, or it could go the other way. So depending on what people's understanding is of EQ, sometimes it's difficult to get them to see the value of it because they don't have a big enough picture. They don't have a big enough image in their mind as to what the set of skills actually covers. So that's often why we have trouble when we're trying to, make a sale or make the argument to people. And then I think the other side of the coin is in the journey towards more human-centric business, trying to value things like mental health awareness, et cetera, et cetera. The pendulum can swing so far that now everybody needs 10 mental health days a year. Take them if you need them or not. Right. And then it's like, wait a second, are we taking the Mickey? And then what can happen is on the surface, we're being all tolerant, but actually this is a concession we don't want to give. And it's a grudge purchase. Now, don't make me now also invest in EQ. So there's a cocktail of dynamics, I think, at play.
Yeah, of course. And that's a great, well-reasoned kind of look at the possible ingredients on any of those kinds of things that might be in play with whomever you're speaking to, from whichever business at the time. You're always going to have more or less kind of openness, receptiveness, but also, I suppose, the wherewithal to act on that without wanting to allow people to kind of take advantage and, because maybe for some reason that might happen in some way. I suppose. Is there something around the definitions that we've been circling around with emotional intelligence that maybe applies in a special case to leadership? Is there something there that's kind of reserved for the act of leading and needing to kind of lead a team to, coordinate their efforts in order to kind of get from A to B and be effective in that way? Have you observed anything in that way?
Yeah, so leadership development is, I guess, it's one of our three main avenues of selling into an organization, specifically because of the sheer power of emotional intelligence skills in the actual job of what a leader needs to accomplish. The father, or maybe by now you can call him the grandfather of emotional intelligence, a guy named Daniel Goleman, wrote the first book on emotional intelligence that was a bestseller and brought it into the popular language, sort of pop culture space. Daniel Goleman said back in, I think it was 1995, he had this quote that 85% of leadership skills are emotional intelligence competencies. And I use that quote often. Nobody's ever disagreed with me on it. I don't know that there is anyone who disagrees. If so, I haven't heard them. Nobody seems to challenge it. And I think the reason is because the task of leadership is not execution. The task of leadership is making sure that the team can deliver the best and can get to the destination we need it to get to, or deliver the product, under budget, on time, or whatever the iteration of that is. And getting the best out of other people. And I don't want it to sound manipulative because I don't think it is, but allowing others to actually contribute the best that they can as individuals, and therefore in context with each other. Emotional intelligence is the gravy, it's the oil you cook in, it's the water you boil in, it's everything. It's everything in that meal that will help the team to arrive at collective intelligence, collective output, collective productivity. Because as soon as we're not all pulling in the same direction, we have vectors pulling against each other, and depending on which team members are pulling in which way, unless we can get them pulling all towards the same place, we're not going to get to the destination we want to be in. And emotional intelligence skills are widely recognized as a critical foundation. They are not the leadership tricks. They're not, ways of having a conversation. but it is the foundation upon which you can add other specific leadership competencies.
Mm.
And it's what creates the context within the group that's being led so that they feel trusted, they feel valued, they feel like they have something to contribute, and they're willing to put their shoulder, whatever, to the task and pull. So yeah, we sell our product and our process to a lot of organizations, specifically in their LDPs, their leadership development programs or management development programs, because of the widely recognized just power of EQ as a foundational bedrock upon which to build other leadership technical skill, I guess.
Mm. How much of what you've seen, maybe especially working with leaders, is influenced by trauma and being able to make sense of trauma? And I think that this is also something that's, as new relatively as some of these conversations around emotional intelligence might be. I think the trauma conversation is maybe even more new and perhaps even more unfamiliar and difficult in a way to talk about, because traumas are exactly that. They're sensitive, they're difficult, they're deep. There's a whole language around trying to figure out, what happened to me, whether I was a kid or whether it happened yesterday. And these things kind of mask themselves in our psyche as traumatic memories or traumatic experiences. And they have an effect. They absolutely influence how we react, how close we can feel to others, and everything else. And it doesn't always have to be about huge, terrible, life-changing traumas. It can be very, very, kind of almost accidental ones, or a small memory I might remember, when I was 2 years old, and somehow I remember nothing else, but that still carried the kernel of something that affects me as I am today, how I show up. So have you found a useful way of bringing that into the conversation without incurring too much resistance?
One of the mechanisms, I guess, of having that conversation, which is I've come across in many different places. I'm not sure who came up with the concept, but this differentiation of capital T trauma and lowercase t trauma.
Right.
I think it's a helpful way of thinking about it, because we haven't all been through deeply traumatic experiences, but that doesn't mean it's an all or nothing. Either you've had like a major trauma or you haven't. So this lowercase t, not the capital T, lowercase t trauma would be, even just, looking at our shared experience of COVID, the trauma we went through in that season it's prolific. It's wide. And I'm not just saying the people who were on I want to say incubators, not incubators, ventilators. Yeah. I'm not just talking about people who had a near-death experience and went through trauma. I'm meaning the people who were fearing. I mean, I've got a bit of an upper respiratory tract dynamic where I'm often short of breath. And in the first 6 months of COVID, I was like, I'd obsess at night I was like, if I get it, I'm going to die. That's traumatic. And I don't say that in a way that says my experience is the same as someone else's. I'm not trying to say that. I'm just trying to say that lowercase t trauma that plagued us all. We were all worried about getting retrenched. We were all worried about whether our businesses would fold. There was so much that was traumatic, and that's just one example. Each of us in our lives today are exposed to so many instances of micro trauma, I guess, lowercase t trauma. And each of those experiences has an impact on the brain and has an impact on the mind. And a lot of that is subconscious. So it's not whether we remember the traumatic experience or not. It's about what our amygdala is remembering as emotional memory, that we may or may not be conscious about. And our psyche has a very clever way of protecting us from rational information. It's why very often people will suppress and, for all intents and purposes, forget that they had a traumatic experience, because their psyche is like ring fencing that and locking it up in a cardboard box and putting tape around it and putting it in the attic and saying, don't think about this. And the process of dealing with that is what the world of psychology has really, given us so many different tools and modalities as to how do we actually unpack trauma so that we can process it and build new ways of operating. So I guess what I would say is the way to have the conversation in a way that doesn't I mean, we don't normally talk about it too much in our conversations around why EQ is valuable, but if it goes there, the way to talk about it is to say all of the emotional memories that are you know processed by the amygdala, saved in the hippocampus. I think it is. I guess the hippocampus on my neurobiology. I haven't prepped for this moment.
You're
That's
doing
all
well.
there, and it will be triggered
Yeah.
by something. And even if you don't know, even if it is a pre-conscious trigger, you're experiencing the triggers. So what emotional intelligence does is to help you process, okay, I'm feeling some. I mean, what we often hear from people who go on a journey of developing EQ is they actually become a lot more aware of their emotions. It gets harder before it gets better. You
Mm.
know, if you've grown up in a story or in a context where you need to shut down your emotion, you actually don't know what you're feeling now as an adult in a
You
similar
disassociate.
experience.
Yeah.
Yeah. Once you go on a bit of a journey, you start saying, okay, I'm feeling something. I'm not sure why. And then as you build that emotional self-awareness, you actually, and the emotional language that goes along with it, you can get to the point of saying, okay, I'm feeling, let's take the trauma example. I'm feeling fear. I'm nervous. I'm not petrified.
Mm.
I'm not, it's a different gradation. Why? And I think it's um, because my lived experience at school was one where I was teased all the time about being short. And here I am, I'm the shortest person in the team, and they're teasing me about it. And actually, it's bringing back some things. I mean, it's so innocuous. It's like, it feels like it's a tiny little thing, but
Mm.
that's happening. And it's because of the trauma, the lowercase t trauma from before. Um, but you can't deal with it until you become the only way out is through, in a sense. You
Mm.
can't deal with it until you process it. um and yeah, so I guess that's part of the dynamic there in terms of how trauma applies. And I guess my final statement there will be to say that even if we haven't recognized it, it's still there in our subconscious.
Yeah. I mean, I think you've captured that beautifully. Because yeah, like you say, we're not going to jump straight into a big trauma conversation, before we've even had starters. It's not always going to be, the first type of thing that is even possible for someone to even remotely look at, because it requires time, it requires trust, obviously. And even then, there's no guarantee of being able to even recognize whether it's capital or small t trauma, but it still does play a role in some way, which is interesting. And I suppose until there's the ability to continue to refine some of the language around that, so that it doesn't bring out a trauma within people to talk about trauma, then
Yes.
yeah, I suppose that we've got to continue to find find a way to. I suppose there's something about denial that kind of comes up for me, where I think we're experts at denial. Human beings are very good at denying the existence of certain things that are either painful or inconsistent to what they want to see as reality, or perhaps, a little bit, just too scary to look at, and so we will invent billion-dollar industries to deny things.
It's interesting. I've never actually, it's the first time I've thought about the idea of denial in the context of EQ, and I'm wondering what the interplay is. Because I mean, so much of what we know about denial, or when we think about denial, it's in the context of the grief journey, like a
Right.
like a
Exactly.
stage of grief, and yeah, it's not presented as a wrong stage or an unhealthy stage. It's
No,
just is. It's a
it's a
stage.
reaction. Yeah.
So I wonder if there's a connection between how long we stay in denial
Mm.
and what our EQ is. That would be an interesting correlation for me. If
Yeah.
we're emotionally self-aware, yeah, I'm trying to think of other subcompetencies that if we were high in them, would it allow us to process the moment
Mm.
quicker so that our denial phase is shorter? But then on the other hand, you get some emotional competencies like optimism,
Mm.
and even some emotions like happiness, which doesn't apply to grief but can still apply to denial, where actually they are they are sneaky little emotions
Yes,
because you're a lot more in touch with reality when you're experiencing sadness than when you're experiencing happiness.
that's
People
true.
who are happy are more gullible, are taken advantage more often, are
Yeah,
more likely to
paying less
be
attention.
too optimistic about
Yeah.
something. And yeah, it's fascinating to see that interplay.
Yeah, well, I mean, all our great poetry comes from when people are absolutely devastated. It's, and so there's something there about the tortured artist. But yeah, I think denial can exist as quite a powerful lever. Whether it's small things like, oh, okay, I'm just going to pretend I didn't see that, or I'll get to that email later, where it might rear its head as maybe just procrastination or deferring something. But I think
Yes.
in other ways, on the other side of the spectrum, if someone is trying to, fundamentally change their appearance because they're perhaps, denying what age does, just as an example, there's no judgment behind that, but just as an example of how we can deny truth in its absolute sort of eternal way as it works through all of us. We all age, we all die, we all, all of these unpleasant things unfortunately happen. How hard are you willing to work to stave those things off because you think you're under some sort of illusion to perhaps buy yourself some more time? And that's where the $1 million industries come from. I think that it's a space where people know that they will invest in denying what they don't want to face.
Yeah, and our inability to be honest or intelligent about the negative emotion. So is it the fear of the unknown? Is it the fact that I put so much value in my body, my physique, and now I don't know who I am anymore. Like my self-regard isn't a actual healthy indication of where my real value lies. I've been placing value on certain things, which would mean I
Precisely.
have a low self-regard actually.
Mm.
Um, or I have an inappropriate self-regard, put it that way.
Right.
And if that's the case, then it's the lack of EQ that is being played on by these big industries
Right.
to
Right.
play into the fears instead of to say, you know, um, let's be honest, let's be real about who we are, where we are, and this is the season we're in. You
Yeah.
know.
Yeah. If anything, it's exacerbating and making that problem bigger in order to, in this sense, potentially turn a profit
Which
or
is
sell something.
very emotionally intelligent in
Yeah,
a
it is. Yeah.
Machiavellian way,
Yeah,
from
it's
those big
unfortunately
corporations.
morally perhaps something else, but absolutely, yeah, and that's business as usual. That's what happens. Thankfully, not every example is like that, but it
Yeah.
does happen for sure. Yeah, it's interesting. Um, I maybe just to sort of close us off, can you say something about willingness? And maybe this is in a way connected to denial in a way, because for me, the opposite of denial, I've thought quite a bit about this, is a willingness, is perhaps a willingness to experience, a willingness to confront, a willingness to go through something. Like you said, sometimes the only way to get to it is to get through it. And I think that perhaps some of the kind of the big skills of the future when we think about human beings thriving is not so much about just the top line ones we all hear about, which empathy and creativity and curiosity. Those absolutely have their place. But I think there's something there about being able to cultivate your sense of willingness, whether that's through the lens of maybe courage or just a sort of a boldness in being able to, maybe even resilience, we've heard that one as well, but a willingness to kind of confront and move through
Yeah.
certain things that are difficult. I often, my wife and I will often say to our son, who's 9, we'll say to him, you can do hard things. And it's been an amazing kind of thing to just see how he responds to that, because he starts to believe that. And when something is hard in front of him, whether it's homework or going fishing or whatever, saying sorry to a friend, slowly he's able to tap into a sense of kind of willingness to do these things, especially if they were previously hard or he didn't want to, or there's another voice there telling him to not do it. So is there a connection there perhaps you want to riff on around willingness and where emotional intelligence can go and how we can apply it more seriously, more cohesively, let's say within the realm of organizations?
Um, I'm glad you talked for as long as you did because it enabled me to come up with some thoughts. When you first
That's
said
why you're the
willingness,
best. Yeah.
I was like, interesting. Where do we go from here? But yeah, I do have some thoughts. You're framing it in the word willingness, and we could frame it in a number of different ways. You even then said courage, but mindfulness would be another way of saying it, which, the benefits of a mindful approach to something is to say, I'm going to just experience what is. I'm going to stand back
That's it.
and notice it. I'm going to be mindful of it. So the application of that could be to, instead of being enthralled in the emotion of anger, if you can be mindful about the scenario, you can say, I am experiencing anger right now.
Mm, mm, mm.
And even just the subtle difference in I am angry, which is an identity statement, like that's who I am. I'm angry. Even if technically, grammatically, it's you're trying to make that an adjective of you. Angry. I'm an angry me.
Yeah.
It sort of plays off a little bit more like a noun. Actually, I am angry. Angry is what I am.
Yes. Yes.
Um, Whereas if you can say, I am experiencing anger, and there's all sorts of different techniques. We use the one technique in one of our modules, which we call leaves on a stream, which is to picture your emotions as a leaf coming down a stream. So you watch it. You're like, I'm feeling despair. Just try and step back a little bit and just imagine that leaf coming down the stream in front of you and stand apart from it and sort of identify it as something that is not you, but is something
Mm.
you are seeing or experiencing. Um, now, willingness in the context of that kind of mindfulness approach is to say, I'm willing to be present to this experience. I'm feeling anger right now.
Mm.
I'm going to try and, not that we want to be detached, but in a moment like that, to be able to detach yourself and say, okay, I
Yes.
am able to see something. If you
Mm.
are willing to meet the moment in that way, it's very different to being only willing to be the one in control of the moment, seeking to be in control. I'm
Mm.
angry. I'm going to live in that anger. And the irony is you're actually more controlled when you step back and say, I'm mindful that this is what I'm experiencing.
Mm.
In our one of the skills of EQ that we develop is psychological flexibility. And the field of psychology that we draw on in that part of our product, in that module, that curriculum aspect, is something called commitment and acceptance therapy. CAT. Sorry, no, acceptance and commitment therapy, ACT, not CAT. Sorry, I again don't have my notes in front of me. I'm trying to remember these things. So,
Yeah.
acceptance and commitment therapy is a way of being able to say, okay, this is what's happening. I accept it. What is my commitment as a response to this reality? And that's how the therapy works. It's to say, let's look at what is,
Yes.
let's be honest about it, let's be willing to be in it. Now, if this is what we have, how are we going to respond? How are we going to step forward? What's your commitment going to be on that? Which again
Yes.
speaks to, and this is very much connected with the psychological flexibility skill, which is an EQ skill. This is
Mm.
a school of thought that says, how do I meet this moment, accept it, commit to it, be willing, and then move forward in adaptive, healthy ways. And the therapy helps you do that.
Exactly. Yeah.
So yeah, so this idea of willingness is very much part of, I think, mindfulness, psychological flexibility, the ability to be present in this moment and not to try and force this moment into something else,
Mm.
or force myself into this moment. For yeah,
Yeah.
because when you're not willing, you are trying to force the other to be willing. You're trying to make
Yeah.
them bend.
Which I suppose, in a way, is a form of denial, because then the denial is, no, I'm not willing to accept what is in front of me and see it and recognize it for what it might be, which is reality telling me something I don't want to hear. And that's where the willingness to not do that, the denial, I suppose, is almost this, two sides of the same coin comes in. But I suppose when you're able to, like you said, commit, or to admit and then commit in
Yeah.
that way, and then to move forward with that, it's such an achievement already, just accomplishing those two steps, because then you are really working with reality as it is. Not just reality. I don't really love the word reality in this sense, but sort of the variables in front of you for whatever might be causing distress, whether it's another person or circumstances or memories or trauma even, and then move forward with that, move forward with power rather than being disempowered with, you know, what is really ultimately just a very, very sly and clever way of denying what's there. Yeah. Well, that's another module for you guys. Checks in the mail. I thank you so much. I've really enjoyed our conversation. Is there anything to say or quick shout out about what you're doing with Migro right now, and you know, where we can find out more about the kind of work you do? So people listening can take a closer look.
Yeah, in a nutshell, Migro is a tool. It's if you're an individual, it operates like an app. If you are part of an organization, some kind of, you know, team, could be even an affiliation, could be a club, church group, whatever. It's more than just an application. It becomes a process that you go on with a group of people to combine individual growth in a collective context of growth. And when you do that, you really begin to see magic happen. So that's the way our tool works. And the vision, the mission we have at Migro is to build an emotionally intelligent world. We deeply believe that the set of skills of EQ are the skills that will differentiate you as an individual, differentiate your organization. They are the things that will build health in any group or team of people. They're the skills of leadership. They are a set of skills that is on the decline in the world as we become more and more binary and bipartisan in our views and in our inability to meet the other and have constructive engagement. And they're also the set of skills that will differentiate one organization from the next. With the rise of AI and automation, the old levels or the old dynamics of cognitive intelligence being very important, they're no longer important. The machines and AI are taking those aspects of technical cognitive intelligence jobs. And the answer is for us to become more human. And it's not about our IQ, really, that makes us more human. It's how we can manage ourselves and interact better with others. So EQ really is, or should I say, EQ skills are the skills of the future. They are what we desperately need to actually move the world forward in more healthy ways than some of the trends and the trajectories that we're seeing around the world. Yeah, so you can find us at www.migro.me.
Wonderful. Thank you, my friend. Well, I think that certainly after listening to you talk today in our conversation, I think it'll be hard to be not convinced that you and Migro are not doing really good work and very worthy work. So thank you for staying the course and being involved in a very, very important problem to be solving. So yeah, I appreciate you. I appreciate our time together. And I look forward to, the next one. We should do this more often.
Next one. And just to say likewise back to you, we didn't talk much today about community, but I would also say the value you're adding to the world is these are the age-old values, but they're values that we need more and more in the future, and needing people like yourself to move us there. So keep up the good work yourself.
Thank you, brother. Lovely. Thanks for listening to this episode of Humble Mind. I hope you enjoyed it. If you're curious to take a look at our community, if you're not a member, you're missing out. Make sure you head to humblemind.co to check out more and to see what we're up to. I look forward to seeing you there. Until next time.